Good evening and a warm St. Lucian welcome to everyone joining us this evening for this virtual launch of the 2020-2021 National Reparations Lecture Series. I am Leslie Green Mitchell and I will be your chair for this evening's proceedings. Before formally welcoming all of you here this evening, I would like to first invite Monsignor Patrick Anthony to bless the proceedings.
Good evening. Bonsoir tout le monde. Let us pray God's presence in our midst across the world as we participate in this important lecture. Heavenly Father, we praise you and bless you and glorify you for the wonders of your love. Papa, nous remercions, nous glorifions, nous bénissons pour tout ça. We thank you, Lord God, for nations of the Caribbean region. We thank you for the islands of St. Lucia and the other islands that form these nations. Papa, nous remercions pour ces pays-là, cette île-là qui a fait une nation ensemble. We ask you, Lord God, to give us that great sense of destiny, that great sense of belonging in a place that you placed us. As we gather tonight and reflect upon the history of our people and the direction we want to go through, we pray, Father, an outpouring of your Holy Spirit upon all your participants, all of our presenters. Papa, fouez Saint-Esprit à nous tous. Bénis le travail que nous avons fait. Nous avons fait ça en nom Papa, en nom Yeshua, en nom Jésus-Christ. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And to conclude my prayer, I would like to get a friend of mine, John Robert Lee, to read a beautiful poem based on a painting by Shalon Fadlin on Black Lives Matter. My friend and poet, John Robert Lee.
This poem is entitled BLM, Black Lives Matter, after a painting by St. Lucian artist Shalon Fadlin. There's an epigraph to this poem, and it comes from the New Testament book of Mark, chapter 15, verse 34, and that text reads the words of Christ on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Hate kneel, white hate on top my breathing, life, time, incomprehensibly. Uncomprehensible that hating hate, 400 years deeper than antiquity. That crow, that iniquitous, that wicked man, him don't know God. Him take me passage hell, 400 years past ancient days, and him thief my wind, wing God give me from my mother, and him lynchpin me long, zong, dung in the grievous ocean of earth. And me hear my name in mouth of strangers, youths, big man, and them say, I dead for them, for them, for them. And I raise up on the bling boards, the placards, the shock shows, the liberty songs of marching children. Black Lives Matter.
And with this, we thank John Robert Lee for concluding our prayer with that beautiful poem, Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Papa, and also Mr. John Robert Lee. As acting head of the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia, and on behalf of the National Preparatory Committee on Reparations, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you joining us here via YouTube and our YouTube and Facebook platforms. Let me take this opportunity to extend a special welcome to our launch partners and presenters for this evening. Welcome Dame Paulette Louisi, Governor General Emerita of St. Lucia and Chair of the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee. Welcome also to Mr. Earl Buskey, veteran St. Lucian journalist and Chair of the St. Lucian National Reparations Committee. Joining us all the way from Trinidad is Dr. Keith Nurse, Principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia. Welcome, Dr. Nurse. And welcome also to Mr. Embert Charles, former director and current chair of the Monsignor Patrick Anthony Folk Research Center. We welcome also Mr. Nkrumah Lucian, who is a history teacher with the St. Mary's College and a member of the National Preparations Committee. And of course, I must single out for an especially warm welcome, Honorable Monsignor Dr. Patrick Anthony, who is our very special guest lecturer this evening, and who will be speaking on the topic, Black Power to Black Lives Matter, What's Next for Reparations? Welcome, Papa, and we look forward with much anticipation to your lecture. Welcome also members of the CARICOM Reparations Committee. A special welcome to Professor Vereen Shepherd, Director of the Center for Reparations Research at the UE, who indicated that she will be joining us this evening. Welcome also to the local members of the local National Preparatory Committee, a diverse local group of individuals and organizations all working together towards the collective goal of ventilating the often misunderstood struggle of Caribbean peoples for reparatory justice. And we welcome our UE family across the region, especially members of the Open Campus, our Open Campus leadership team, our heads, our coordinators, lecturers, staff, students, and of course, our sister campuses across the region. Welcome everyone joining us locally and from across the region. Welcome one and all. While the role of championing the call for reparations is a relatively new one for me personally, the University of the West Indies that I am proud to serve has long been a contributor to and champion of the reparations movement. Indeed, our very own Sir Arthur Lewis, the first Vice Chancellor of the UE, was crowned father of the modern reparations movement during a recent reparations symposium held on June 15th, for drawing to British attention that the hundreds of years of free labor it extracted from enslaved people in the Caribbean was a debt that must be repaid. Lewis wrote this in the aftermath of the 1930s labor protests in the Caribbean and ahead of the Moyne Commission report, grounded in the belief that post-war economic policies in the Caribbean could not be done in isolation of Britain's substantial financial input. He justified the reasons for which the Caribbean was entitled to economic input by Great Britain by insisting that it is the British who by their action in past centuries are responsible for the presence in these islands of the majority of their inhabitants, whose ancestors as slaves contributed millions to the wealth of Great Britain, a debt which the British have yet to repay. During this same symposium, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, our current Vice Chancellor, went on to explain that by locating reparations within the framework of economic development, Sir Arthur influenced the CARICOM Reparation Commission to conceptualize their 10-point action plan for reparatory justice within the framework of a developmental package for the Caribbean. In the last 5 years, the UE has blazed a discursive trail that transcends the local conversation by connecting to its global aspects. In 2017, with a mandate from the Caribbean heads of government, it institutionalized the Center for Reparations Research at the UE in order to give support to the CARICOM Commission on Reparations established 2 years earlier. The center is led by Professor Vereen Shepherd, former director of the Institute for Gender Development Studies, a co-chair of the National Council on Reparations in Jamaica, and one of the 3 vice chairs of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. To date, there are 12 national reparations committees, including our own local committee, all of which have been engaged in a range of activities designed to build public awareness on the issue of reparatory justice. Our UWI Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, is chair of the commission. More recently, the University of the West Indies, in collaboration with the University of Glasgow, arguably smashed the Global Reparations glass ceiling by signing a landmark Memorandum of Understanding on August 23, 2019 in Glasgow. The two universities' vice-chancellors opened a new era in the global reparations movement by signing a £20 million reparation deal into reality. And so this evening, the Open Campus St. Lucia, along with its many contributing partners, is proud to be part of this long history, proud to be able to play our part in raising awareness as an advocate of reparatory justice and an example of 21st century university enlightenment for all of our citizens. We thank you again for joining us this evening. And now we move into the next segment of this evening, during which each of the lecture series partners will deliver a brief message on behalf of their respective organizations. Leading the way this evening is Dame Paulette Louisi, Governor General Emerita of St. Lucia. Tonight, however, Dame Paulette joins us in her capacity as the chair of the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee and as one of the many learned lecturers we will be privileged to be addressed by and to interact with over the next few months. Dame Paulette Louisi, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Leslie, and good evening all. The Nobel Laureate Festival Committee is pleased to partner with the National Reparations Committee to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the death of our first Nobel laureate, Sir William Arthur Lewis, through this lecture series, and to pay tribute to one who is increasingly being referred to as the founder of reparations for Caribbean development. Over the past 27 years, St. Lucia has been hosting a memorial lecture in Sir Arthur's name to show the world, and particularly our people here at home, the real stature of the man whom we can describe as having been truly ahead of his time. Most of us know him as an economist, understandably so, for he is described as the founding father of development economics. But Sir Arthur was a social scientist, and we remember his initiatives as a social activist in Manchester, where he sought to alleviate the sordid living and working conditions of the African and Caribbean community in Moorside, with his establishment of community social centers. His advocacy for better social conditions for underserved communities lies at the heart of much of his development work. In a recent Sir Arthur Lewis International Symposium, to which Leslie referred, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles shared with us the genesis of the first Sir Arthur Lewis economic development model and his call for reparations from Britain in his seminal publication, Labor in the West Indies in 1935. There has, of course, been many iterations of that model, but the seed for this call for reparations and for reparatory justice was sown by Sir Arthur, and the region has a duty to follow this through to full fruition. The Nobel Laureate Festival Committee has been struggling over the years to get the public to appreciate Sir Arthur's contribution to St. Lucia and the region in practical terms. The question has always been, what has he done? We therefore welcome this initiative by the National Reparations Committee, which puts the spotlight once again on Sir Arthur's vision and passion for sustainable human development. We look forward to Monsignor Anthony's inaugural lecture, and I enjoin everybody to sit down, listen, and learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dame Paulette, and thank you for highlighting so clearly the role of Sir Arthur, the role that he played so long ago in laying the very important foundation for our modern efforts as we continue to seek for reparations. As we heard previously, to date, there are 12 national reparation committees, all of which have been engaged in a range of activities designed to build public awareness on the issue of reparatory justice. In St. Lucia, our National Reparations Committee is led and chaired by the indefatigable Mr. Earl Buskey, veteran St. Lucian journalist, and as I said, the chair of the NRC. As many of you may be aware, Mr. Buskey is currently recuperating from a serious accident. Yet, throughout his recovery, his enthusiasm and commitment to our plans never once waned. He continues to lead the charge for reparations locally, and we look forward to hearing from him. This evening, he does double duty, as he will also be saying a few words on behalf of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Welcome, Mr. Buskey.
Thank you. And welcome to everybody joining us tonight. And of course, it is my duty to deliver this message. And of course, tonight we end a long period of planning and we start a longer period of execution. But this inaugural lecture has been a long time in coming. In fact, our lecture series started in 2016 when the first was launched right here at the UWI Open Campus. It coincided with the NRC's Marcus Garvey colloquy on August 17, 4 years ago this month, and was launched by Ambassador Dr. June Soomer, Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States. The joint lecture series coordinated with the Open Campus continued at some but not all secondary schools locally in the north, south, east, and west of the island. Thanks to the cooperation we have received from the UWI Open Campus, the Office of the Ambassador to CARICOM and the OECS, the Regional Integration Unit, the Nobel Laureates Festival Committee, the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, and others, we are here to launch tonight the first of the 2 series of annual lectures, the second to continue our focus on schools, and which you will hear more of a bit later. The NRC, meanwhile, hosted 2 online teleconferences 2 months ago, a regional youth and students workshop on June 12th on the importance of history, and the Sir Arthur Lewis International Symposium, which both Leslie and Dame Paulette referred to, held on June 16th. And each broke attendance and participation records according to UWI TV Global, which broadcast both. But we could not have done it without the inputs of our NRC members and entities, including the Archaeological and Historical Society, the Monsignor Patrick Anthony Folk Research Center, the National Youth Council, and the Ionola Council for Improvement of Rastafari, among others. Sir Hilary Beckles and other members of the CRC, including Professor Vereen Shepherd, viewing this evening. Welcome, Professor Shepherd, and other NRC chairpersons in the other 11 CARICOM territories referred to by Leslie, the CARICOM Secretariat, the University of the West Indies, and the UWI's Reparations Research Center, which Professor Shepherd also heads, have all sent their best regards for this evening. All have wished success for our twin lectures in the land of 2 languages and twin mountains, of two Nobel laureates sharing twin birthdays, a small island with two harbors and two airports that also endured centuries of slavery under two major European nations. Tonight, we forward to the future with a look at the past, from Black Power to Black Lives Matter. Join us for the ride. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Busquet, for giving us an account of all the work that you have been involved in, and our many partners also have been involved in over the last few months as we prepare to launch this lecture series and a number of other activities, all towards, of course, the same purpose. I now invite Dr. Keith Nurse to join us. Dr. Keith Nurse is part of our UE family, having formerly served as the World Trade Organization chair at the University of the West Indies. More recently, Dr. Nurse worked as senior economist and advisor on structural policies and innovation at the OECD Development Center in Paris. He serves on the Executive Bureau of the UN Committee for Development Policy and also as a member of the Hemispheric Program Advisory Committee of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. He joins us this evening, however, in his capacity as principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia. Welcome, Dr. Nurse, and I now invite you to deliver your message.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Greetings to all. It is indeed a pleasure to participate in this evening's launch. At the college, we see this as a really important part of our contribution to the education process, particularly on this issue. For us, reparations is a critical pathway for the development of the region. And as we all know, and we've heard in some of the presentations, Sir Arthur Lewis is considered to be the father of the concept of reparations with his publication on labor in the West Indies. What I want to do in this very short period is to, of course, thank the committee for organizing this lecture this evening. But I wanted to make just a quick comment on the linkage between the reparations issue and the larger development question. I think if you look at the work of Sir Arthur Lewis, particularly his, what can be considered his magnum opus, Growth and Fluctuations, he suggests that when the global economy goes into a depressionary period, that a number of things happen. The rise of social debt, meaning a decline in the capacity of our economies to meet the needs of our populations. I fear that we have arrived at a similar period to the one that is chronicled in the labor in the West Indies, which provoked a whole range of social changes in the Caribbean and around the world. And so I think what we have to be thinking about as we discuss reparations is also to identify, in more critical and more delineated terms, what are the development strategies that we are going to utilize to overcome some of the centuries of legacies associated with colonization and slavery. So for example, the region is affected by a whole range of crises, whether it be climate change or the high incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases. And so as we proceed, these become the key benchmarks that we have to grapple with as we proceed in addressing the development equation. What role can reparations play in this regard? Needs to be better articulated, better understood by our populations. And so lectures like this one, I think, play a really critical role in taking us forward. So without much further comment, I would like to again thank the organizers for inviting the Sartolus Community College to participate in these processes. We aim to play our role in terms of upgrading the capabilities of our young minds in particular to respond to these global challenges. So thank you very much, and back to you, Leslie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nurse, and thank you for focusing on the link between reparations and the future development of the region. I'm sure that's something that Monsignor Anthony will also touch on in this lecture that we are so looking forward to. And so now we come to the main event, the delivery of the inaugural lecture of the 2020-2021 Reparations Lecture Series. With us this evening to introduce Honorable Monsignor Anthony is Mr. Embert Charles, Chair of the Monsignor Patrick Anthony Folk Research Center. Mr. Charles and Papa have been friends and colleagues for many, many years. And so in searching for someone to do justice to introducing Monsignor Anthony, I could think of no more fitting person than Mr. Embert Charles to do so. And so, without any further ado, I invite Embert to formally introduce our guest lecturer.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Welcome all. It's my immense pleasure to introduce my friend, my mentor, Patrick Anthony, also called Paba, but best known for his work in awakening the consciousness of St. Lucians on the richness of our culture. Patrick Angus Butcher Anthony, Paba, recently retired as director of the Cardinal Felix Archdiocesan Pastoral Center in St. Lucia. He holds a master's degree in theology from Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, and a doctoral thesis, a doctoral degree from the Department of English at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. Theologian, queer language expert, cultural activist, communication specialist. Monsignor Anthony is the founder of the Folk Research Center, which was recently renamed after him. He's also been involved in a number of pioneering initiatives. He founded the St. Lucy's Home in St. Lucia for rehabilitation of street people, the Jubilee Trust Fund, and the George Odlum Fund for Creative Arts. He's a founding member of the Catholic Conference on Theology and went on to be editor of Theology in the Caribbean Today, which is the collection of papers from the proceedings of these conferences. He was also president of the Antilles Catholic Press Association between 1996 and 1998. And from 1982 to 2014, he edited the Catholic Chronicle, a monthly newspaper of the Catholic Church in St. Lucia. Papa was also Archdiocesan Press Officer for St. Lucia and a member of the Eastern Caribbean Press Council from 2003. Among his pioneering initiatives was the founding of the WACC, World Association of a Christian Communication Caribbean region called WAC Caribe, which actually broke off from the Latin American region in 1996. So he served as the founding president and also a director on WAC Central Committee at the global level from 1996 to 2000. He has been visiting lecturer at the Center for Religious Communication, University of Dayton, Ohio, and research partner at the faculty and faculty member at the Center for Mission Research and Study, Maryknoll, New York, and visiting lecturer at the Caribbean School of Catholic Communication in Trinidad and Tobago. His claim to authority on the subject he's going to speak to us tonight of Black empowerment dates back to the 1970s. When he created the Space for Black Studies, he formed the Black Studies group, a group of young college students in St. Lucia. He also formed the Study in Action group, and of course, this was the genesis of the Folk Research Center. His provocative initiatives have never ceased. He continues to do them. Monsignor Anthony's academic interest is in the relationship between theology and culture, especially literature and theology. He has published internationally on the works of Derek Walcott, on popular Catholicism, and on cultural issues. In 2018, the Folk Research Center published The Road to Mount Pleasant, a series of essays and studies in his honor, which has become perhaps the most authoritative text on St. Lucian culture today. In 2000, he was awarded the St. Lucia Cross by the government of St. Lucia, and in 2013, a National Cultural Hero by the Folk Research Center. In 2019, WACC, the World Association for Christian Communication, declared him a WAC laureate among the global laureates WAC have declared for the last few years. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Papa, Monsignor Patrick Anthony, to deliver his lecture on the topic, What Next for Reparation? From Black Power to Black Lives Matter. Let's welcome Papa.
Good evening, friends. Bonsoir tout le monde. I would like tonight to begin by honoring one of our cultural heroes in St. Lucia. Unfortunately, anointed a few days ago, and he passed. I speak of none other than Michael Overton, Mighty, St. Lucia's Independence Calypso monarch, a BBC short story writer winner. One who has given us an important study of St. Lucian history and culture in Negmaon. And tonight I want to begin by honoring Mike, because Mike has given us a calypso that is so fitting. It is called Making Bread on the Dead. Now, it may seem as though with the whole question of reparation, we today are trying to make bread on our dead ancestors. So I found it a kind of a bit of a pun that, Mike should pass this week at a time when we are reflecting on the journey of our people and their right to reparation. So let us honor my friend Mike with me by listening to his provocative little calypso, Making Bread on the Dead.
I was lying in me permanent bed, don't you be misled. The doctors and them had already pronounced me dead. All of a sudden, I hear a big noise on top of me head. You won't believe me, but it was a big tractor tread. They got no shame, they should be blamed. Making bread on the dead. Got no respect, I do object. I tell you them fellas dread. As I turn round in me nice coffin, I wish I was not Anglican. The Catholics and them must be have a dead folks union. The tractor digging, man it pushing, bradam bram, all the graves falling. If I was a zombie, I'd push up me bony hand. They got no shame, they should be blamed. Making bread on the dead. Got no respect, I do object. I tell you them fellas bread. tractor like a German tank, making room for the bank. Barclays ain't care if the place stink up like a skunk. I say the public should think the place haunted and go on Bridge Street instead. They better do, cause me go sure gon' make them scared. They got no shame, they should be blamed. Making bread on the dead. Got no respect, I do object. I tell you them fellas dread. Can you imagine walking inside this bank to get your money? And you have to throw $10 to walk out safely. Because me partners and myself agree, we ain't taking this easy. If they want to use all we land, they must pay we fee. They got no shame, they should be blamed. Making bread on the dead. Got no respect, I do object. I tell you them fellas red. The sewers, them passing through me grave, and they ain't well paved. I don't know why the clocks think it's their duty to make me bathe. And others hear them talking about bathing core right under the floor. I wonder what it mean, but now I sure is bathing come on. They got no shame, they should be blamed. Making bread on the dead. Got no respect, I strongly object. I tell you them fellas red. Red.
Thank you, mighty, mighty. May he rest in peace. There are so many nuances, connections in that piece by Mighty Mighty. Making bread on the dead, yes. Baffin Corp, Barclays Bank, the poor people. There are so many connections. And as we lay Mighty Mighty to rest, we take up the struggle not to just to make bread on the dead, but to see how the dead who have given their lives will receive through their descendants what is justly their grandfather's back pay, as Chuck would say. I speak to you today as we recall UNESCO inviting us to remember the abolition of slavery on the 23rd of August. There is a beautiful memorial outside the headquarters, the UN headquarters in New York. It's called the Ark of Return. And as we begin this series of lectures, we bear in mind that we are part of a journey that returns to our origins so that we can now look to our future. This image which you see here has brought to mind another image of a young St. Lucian artist, a sculptor called Jalim Udovic, the son of our renowned St. Lucian sculptor, Mr. Udovic himself, the master sculptor, Joseph Udovic. And this young artist has produced what the government asked him to somehow capture the hopes and dreams of St. Lucia for Independence 2020. So he did a piece called All In. And in that piece, Jalim has the 4 groups that came to the islands. The Kalinagos, the original peoples. He has the African slaves who were brought in. And he has the Europeans of different backgrounds who were brought in also. And together they are forming a unitive struggle for progress, for development. As Jalim says, that peace symbolizes collectivity, cooperation. For me, this Jalim Yudovic image and the Ark of Return fits right into the discourse that we are having today. From Black Power to Black Lives Matter. What next for reparation? I speak to you again as a young Roman Catholic priest. I recall when I was in the seminary in the 70s, it was a time of great ferment, a time when we were trying to respond to the call for Caribbean development of the new Caribbean man. It was a time when there was a burst of consciousness from the work of people like Stokely Carmichael and, of course, Marcus Garvey before him, and the Black Power movement throughout the region. As a young student in Trinidad, I was moved to appreciate the role that I, as a Catholic priest, to be, would have to play in that struggle for development. And this is why, when I returned to St. Lucia, I was pleased that people like Jomo Primus had been promoting the whole concept of Black consciousness and Black rights. Today, Jomo is retired. Few people remember him. Out of Jomo's efforts, we recall what emerged of the forum in St. Lucia, where people like George Odlum, and in those days, calling the people on the market steps, trying to build up their awareness of what it is to be a Black person, to be a Black man in your own country. As a priest, as a young Catholic priest, it gave me a great joy to be able to join that process. It caused a lot of pain, a lot of suffering because of the response to my efforts to build up an awareness among young students. These young students today have places of importance in our national and regional development. I speak of people like Didicus Jules, Dr. Didicus Jules, people like Osbert Dovine, Kennedy Booth Samuel. All of these young people were part of that group who joined me in trying to build up awareness of our identity as Black people in St. Lucia. But friends, the discourse tonight is about reparation. I belong to an institution that was in the belly of the colonization of our region. And I would say that my task tonight is to promote a conversation. I will call it a conversation about what reparation should really mean in a St. Lucian context, and others will do it in different islands, in our Caribbean context, but particularly in our context, because there are people who think reparation is all about money and so forth. Reparation is about a moral position. Reparation is about the conscience of a civilization. Reparation is about justice internationally. Remembering, reparation is about memory. Memory of those who have inflicted such inhumanity upon others, who have paid reparation in different ways to some. But for Black people, people of African heritage, African origin, reparation is still to come. And that is why I like what Prime Minister Mia Mottley said about reparations. In an interview, she was asked a question, and listen to what Mia Mottley had to say.
This is not a simple discussion as to what sort of sums. We've been arguing this for over 20 years, and the CARICOM Reparatory Commission has basically set out a 10-point plan of the different things that they believe need to be done, starting, of course, with an apology, but also dealing with things such as the psychological rehabilitation as a result of the trauma, dealing with assistance and remedying the public health crisis. Most people don't even recall that the diets of slaves were heavily salted, and in many instances have led to the kind of intergenerational hypertension and diabetes and chronic non-communicable diseases that we see. And then in respect of the debt, Caribbean governments at the point of independence, there was no development compact to say, look, this is what you need to go forward. But what they did was to try to reverse the negative aspects of colonialism, which meant dealing with housing, which meant dealing with right to education, right to healthcare, all of the basic things that normal governments would want to see as part, in fact, of the Sustainable Development Goals today that the United Nations has set up. Now, I said to you that this was started about 20 years ago, largely because in December 2000, I was then Minister of Culture and Education. I would have been the one leading the Barbados delegation to the UN World Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia, and Racial Discrimination. And that was one of the preparatory conferences that took place before we went to Durban in September 2001 for the World Conference. In between there, we would have had a number of meetings in Geneva across the world. In fact, I remember it well because it was the same week that the German government agreed to give compensation to those who were affected by the awful Holocaust of World War II. So that this is not a new concept. What I want to say, and I think Prince Harry captured it, there has to be a conversation. It can't be reduced to a headline. It can't be reduced to sensationalizing. And to that extent, therefore, we expect that a conversation, difficult as it may be, is absolutely necessary. The English-speaking Caribbean is perhaps one of the most highly indebted regions in the entire world, with debt to GDP ratios way above many other countries. And of course, now that we've gone into the COVID pandemic, it's become exceptionally difficult for a lot of these countries to be able to raise money on their own because of the high debt burden that they carry, not because of any wickedness, but already because they want to be able to put in place a development compact for their people that was not given to their people prior to independence, and the resources were not left for us to do so in a way that the compensation took place at emancipation.
So this...
And you're...
So it's a conversation. And I want to join this conversation as a Roman Catholic priest in St. Lucia at this time. You see, we have had several incidents, tragedies over the years. In the 1970s, for example, we had the Black Power movement where crucifixes were painted black. It was the people were saying something about the dominant structures in society, like churches, like banking systems, political systems, and so forth. Recently in St. Lucia, we have had that same reaction taking place.
2020 vision, new generation, the Armageddon. Lava, burn Jesus. Lava, burn Lucifer. Lava, burn the devil. Lava, burn Satan. Judgment. Judgment. I believe in you too. Until I see the first. Lava! Burn Jesus! Lava! Burn the Holy Ghost! Lava!
The conversation. It's a conversation that all parts of society must have, with the prejudice, the injustice, the deprivation, the brutality that have been inflicted by people upon people, particularly persons in power, persons of certain ethnic and origin. And I, as a Roman Catholic priest, have had to probe deep inside and ask myself, the symbols of what this young man was saying and others have done, I've said, what is that saying to us about our societies, the transformation that we need to take place in our societies? The bishops of the Caribbean in the 1970s wrote an encyclical called Justice and Peace in the New Caribbean, in which they confessed. We want to confess here in full frankness and humility that the record of our church in this respect has not always been as good as it should be. In spite of the examples of many dedicated priests and religious who have lived among the poor and fully shared in the hardship, too often the church we represent has seemed to be on the side of the wealthy and the powerful. And in order to maintain a position of privilege, it has sometimes closed its eyes to wrongs and injustices, crying out for redress. In the colonial past, the church sometimes acted as if it were part of the establishment, condoning either openly or by its silence the existing order. And in the post-colonial era, the church in some places has not accepted the need for change with sufficient alacrity and goodwill. Our church has also been guilty on occasions of acts of racial discrimination and of perpetuating social and class divisions. For these commissions and omissions of the past and the present, we, the bishops of the Antilles Conference, humbly beg pardon from God, the Lord and Judge of history, and from you, the people of the region. This was in 75. Have things changed? Has the situation changed? The issues that face us today are still the same. Has the church contributed to the transformation of the prejudiced, racially charged, divisive society that we have in the Caribbean? I would like to go to the CARICOM's 10 points for a reparatory program, which Prime Minister Mia Mottley alluded to. Look at those 10 points. Full formal apology. Yes, the church has apologized. Have other institutions in the society apologized as yet? But is apology enough? Is apology, are these just empty words? Is there any program for structural transformation? Is there any program for embracing development models that will place the poor and the marginalized, especially the downtrodden, place them in a position where they can be humanized? I will talk a little about that in a while. Because when we talk about reparation, the way forward, from Black Power to Black Lives Matter, all the gains of consciousness raising which the Rastafarians have over the years been promoting in our society, these must become tangible through structures and institutions, like the political structures, like the banking structure, like the religious structures. That's where the transformation must take place. So reparation is a conversation, not just simply talking about money is being paid. It's about transformation of a society. So the 10 points of the CARICOM's preparatory program, goes repatriation, Indigenous People Development Program. When we talk about reparation, what's about our First Peoples? What's about the First Nations people in St. Lucia? We have to go back and recognize that even right now, some people want to make bread on the dead. They want to make bread, as Mighty Mighty said, on the bones of our dead Amerindians. Yes. Is that the kind of development that is proper? We continue. Cultural institutions, public health crisis. Prime Minister Mia Mottley alluded to that. Illiteracy eradication, African knowledge programs, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, debt cancellation. These are all part of the CARICOM's program for reparation. But it requires of institutions that have been instrumental in the propagation of injustice, racial and economic and otherwise, to get involved and to be part of that process of creating a new society post Black Lives Matter. When I saw the CARICOM's 10 points and studied it deep, I thought of the relationship between Black power and Black Lives Matter, and the role that Caribbean people like Marcus Garvey, Stokely Carmichael, all of these persons had contributed to the awareness of our identity as African persons in the New World. So I thought I would look at what the Americans, African people had. And the National African American Reparation Commission had a similar set of points like the ones the CARICOM Commission said. The first point, like CARICOM, a formal apology and establishment of a MAFA, the Swahili word for disaster, a MAFA African Holocaust Institute. Like us, the right of repatriation and creation of African knowledge program, the right to land for social and economic development, fund for cooperative enterprises and socially responsible entrepreneurship development, resources for health, well-being, and healing of Black families and communities, education for community development and empowerment, affordable housing for healthy Black communities and wealth generation, strengthening Black America's information and communication infrastructure, preserving Black sacred sites and monuments, repairing the damage of the criminal injustice system. As I looked at these points from the North American Reparations Committee, and as I thought of CARICOM's points for reparation, what came to mind was that they were so reminiscent of some fundamental principles of my own church's social teachings. For example, human dignity, recognition of the dignity of the human person, community, rights and duties, option for the poor, participation, economic justice, stewardship of creation, solidarity, role of government and promotion of peace. Those are principles that come from the bosom of my own faith position, my own institution. But that is the institution which just confessed that we had not been part of the social teachings. We had not recognized the sacredness of the person. That is why we perpetuated racial prejudice, which goes against the dignity of the person and the sacredness of the person. The rights and responsibilities, they are entitled to certain rights and certain responsibilities. Have we promoted this? As an institution that has been so influential in Caribbean society, I say today in our conversation, I would like our conversation to be a model of the conversation that all other institutions and structures which have contributed to the situation of people of African origin in the West today. They should have that conversation and ask themselves, are we contributing to the transformation of our societies, or are we perpetuating the structures of injustice, the structures of oppression, the right of workers, solidarity, care for creation, a fundamental principle like the care for creation, a development model such as Arthur Lewis was pushing, a model that would utilize and recognize the resources of people in a stewardship way in which we realize that we are custodians of the resources of today. We are not to be abusers of the resources of today, but we are to be custodians who utilize them in a symbiotic relationship, caring for the earth, respecting creation, respecting the environment, so that the environment and us can live together and we can, but more than that, that we can hand on to generations to come. All of those principles, for me, I find them within my own faith community, but also embedded within the 10 points of the CARICOM reparation program, as well as the 10 points of the North American reparations program. And this is why, for me, it is so important for us to continue this conversation. As I said, it's a conversation, but it's a conversation that has great potential for future development. In St. Lucia, we have had that conversation going on in different ways, in small groups, in small sectors. And for me, when we ask what next for reparation, I would say that the conversation which has been ongoing for so long has to become now broadened. It has to become more participatory. It has to become more popular. Honorable Sir Dunstan Santoma, the late Sir Dunstan Santoma, is one man who, at the beginning of my ministry in St. Lucia as a young priest, helped me to understand his own struggle as an artist. He once told me in an interview I did with him, I can't go like a politician, take a loudspeaker and talk about my blackness. That doesn't have meaning. I must do something about my blackness. I must show my blackness in its glory, in its beauty, and its reality. I must do something about my blackness. In little groups, little corners, people have been doing things about blackness, about their blackness. People have been doing things to help to transform the society. But this has been minuscule. What next for reparation? That conversation that has been taking place in little rooms, little meetings, in little groups, must be broadened. It must become a bold discourse, a societal discourse, which must be popularized. Listen to Dunstan, the kind of thing that Dunstan Santoma was saying. In the 70s, Black Power time. Today we're talking about Black Lives Matter. Dunstan Santoma was saying in the 70s, if my faith depends on Christ being white, I think I will lose my faith. Because the relationship that exists in the world between the white race and the black race, one of prejudice and inferiority for the black, and if as a growing man, I have to accept that the one person I feel I could follow of necessity must be white, somehow I think my whole life is in vain. It's a waste of time. What was I born for in the first place? If God is a God and he decides to make you in an inferior bracket to live and die, to remain inferior all that time, that is impossible, said Dunstan. And this is why he did something about it. He said, I cannot see my people developing, finding happiness, being secure, free, being wonderful, lovely people, if they must of necessity have a white God. It's contradictory to their nature, it's conflicting. It must create conflict and discord and terror and violence and so forth, because the human mind cannot accept it. Doesn't that sound familiar? Is our world today any different from what Dunstan was talking about in the 70s? Are the institutions not perpetuating the kind of thing that Dunstan was railing against? Dunstan continues, that means that in a few years, all Black people in the world will have to abandon Christ as they develop. Why do some young men feel they have to burn down the white Jesus? It's a conversation we're having. It's a conversation on the need for structural transformation. It's a conversation about the need for metanoia. It's a conversation about the need for moral transformation. That means that in a few years, all Black people in the world will have to abandon Christ as they develop. As a result, I feel that the greatest contribution I'm making, and I've made as an artist in St. Lucia, my monument is that I've been able to start painting Christ, his mother, and Joseph in churches as Black. Your God must be of you, and you of your God. I live in God, and God lives in me. And my God must be like my father, like my ancestors. That is Dunstan St. Thomas. And his discourse can join with our conversation because it was about Black power, but it's relevant today as we talk about Black Lives Matter because the transformation has not taken place. The structures are still there. The prejudice is still there. The values are still there. The attitudes are still there. Institutions are still in their comfort zone. And that is why his words are so powerful. That means that in a few years, all Black people in the world will have to abandon Christ as they develop. Because if the notion of Christ, of God that is presented, is an alienating one, then of course, people have to abandon it. But I'm suggesting that in fact, the kind of Christianity, the kind of God we have presented is really an idol, not the real God. It is not Christianity that has failed. It is the manner in which we have propagated culture, civilization, European civilization in the name of development. And that is why the conversation must be about transformation, radical transformation. I know time is running out. I would like to go on to something that has struck me most powerfully. I read an article recently, and this article was taken, it's called Repairing the Debt Owed Black People Requires a Democratic and Reparative Economy. It is by a piece by Ron Daniels and Ronald Calvin, first published in Open Democracy, August 11, 2020. It goes back to the concept of conversation that Mia Motley spoke earlier on, which I've been talking about. In this inaugural lecture, it's about a conversation. It's a conversation about values, attitudes, the way forward. It's a conversation about the positions that we must take. It's a conversation about the radical positions that we must take. It's a conversation about the self-examination that we must all be part of. Listen to Ron Daniels and Ronald Calvin. They say, the more important conversation is not how much to be paid, as the BBC were asking Mia Motley, but rather how much must change. The important conversation is not how much must be paid, as Mia Motley reiterated, it's not about how much must be paid, but rather how much must change. To be frank, all of it ultimately has to change. That's what Daniels and Calvin says. In other words, the entire system that continues to exert violence against and extract labor and blood from Black lives and communities must go. He's talking about America. How is that applicable to Caribbean social structure? How is that applicable to Caribbean civilization? America's system of racial capitalism must be overturned and replaced with a system and ways of being that naturally produce the outcomes of justice, freedom, health, healing, sustainable environment, and collective well-being that we seek. We call that system a democratic and reparative economy. I find in this concept of democratic and reparative economy some of the principles of my own church position, which we have not been sufficiently true to. Because if we were true to it, there would have been much more structural change within our churches and within the society. We would have been prophets and proponents, radical proponents of structural transformation in our society. But we have not been faithful to them. That is why I find this concept so close to the thinking that I believe is really nascent in my Catholic tradition, but which we have not fully embraced. Daniel and Calvin says, a democratic economy is, simply put, an economy of, by, and for people. It is fundamentally designed to meet our essential needs within the regenerative capacity of the earth. It responds to the voices and concerns of regular people. It shares wealth without regard to race, gender, nationality, or class. It places serving the common good as its core. You can go back to those principles which I told you is part of my tradition. Human dignity, community, rights and duties, option for the poor, participation, economic justice, stewardship of creation, solidarity, role of government, promotion of peace. You see, this for me, in this concept of democratic and reparatory economy, I think it's where the conversation with Sir Arthur Lewis can continue. Because Sir Arthur Lewis's model of economic development, sustainable economic development, can link in beautifully, and I hope our future lectures will explore the relationship between reparative economy and Sir Arthur Lewis's model. But here, as we continue our conversation, I believe that my own church position has within it the seeds for a new approach to the discourse on reparation in St. Lucia and in Caribbean society. We have the principles. Let us apply those principles. Our Nobel laureate, Derek Walcott, when Barack Obama was appointed as president of the United States, he wrote a poem called 40 Acres. 40 acres to honor the presidential election victory of Barack Obama. It is a powerful poem. It also links the struggle for Black Lives Matter in the United States with our own Caribbean people. In this case, Sir Arthur Lewis and his economic development plans, Derek Walcott and his contribution to social transformation through his work as an artist. Those like Marcus Garvey and Stokely Carmichael and the others who have gone before us. In St. Lucia, we've had outstanding figures. Some people don't know of them, but there have been St. Lucians who have promoted such ideas. But just let's look at Derek Walcott's poem. Out of the turmoil emerges an emblem, an engraving, a young Negro adorned in straw hat and overalls, an emblem of impossible prophecy, a crowd dividing like the furrows which a mule has plowed, parting for the president, a field of snow-flecked cotton, 40 acres wide, of crows with predictable omens that the young plowman ignores for his unforgotten cotton-head ancestors. While lying on one branch is a tense court of bespectacled owls, and on the field's receding rim, a gesticulating scarecrow stamping with rage at him. The small plow continues on this line page. Beyond the morning ground, the lynching tree, the tornado's black vengeance. And the young plowman feels a change in his veins, heart, muscle, tendons, till the land lies open like a flag as dawn shorelight streaks the field and furrows wait for the sower. Derek observes, regarding the 40 acres to freed slaves of America, the country did not give the black man the 40 acres and a mule as promised. But tonight instead, they gave the black man 50 states and the White House. That was a hope. That was a dream. Black Lives Matter in the United States tell us how much of a hope and a dream that was. That is why today there is this upheaval, this revolution that is taking place in the United States. And likewise in our own Caribbean societies. There must be that conversation that takes into consideration the structures of injustice, the structures of economic oppression, the structures of violation of our environment, the structures of desecration of our sacred places, of our First Nation peoples. Reparation means restoring all of the dignity that has been so abusively taken away from First Nation peoples and from peoples of African descent and other Caribbean peoples. We have to work towards a reparative, a transformative, a wholesome new civilization. Black Lives Matter is the impetus, but Black power has brought us to this point. As we continue the journey, there will be many calls from many quarters. There will be many questions. It is a conversation we must have, a serious conversation, a radical conversation, a bold conversation. Let us not despair. Let us not give up hope. In St. Lucia, the Folk Research Center, which the young men who were working with me tried to raise awareness of our sense of identity as St. Lucian. And within that context, our language, the Creole language, became a weapon for the development of our self, our consciousness, because the dominance, the linguistic dominance in our society was reflective of the structure of economic dominance that was taking place and continues to take place. So that a young, hardworking farmer who cannot speak English, for example, would go to a bank And because he cannot speak English, he would somehow be considered second-class citizen. In our society today, the color of your skin, the shades of your skin still say a lot, because the structures that came out of slavery are still present within our minds as well as within our institutions. So when Mali says, liberate yourself from mental slavery, it is not only mental slavery that we have to liberate ourselves from, but structural oppression, structures that are unjust, structures that are economically unfair, structures that politically disenfranchised. We have to liberate ourselves from these. So what next for reparation? Black power, Black Lives Matter? It is a bold conversation, a radical confirmation, an honest conversation. No holds barred. Because if we do not have this conversation, we will have fire, destruction, and that is not necessary. So as we inaugurate our lecture series on reparatory justice, reparations now, my call is for continued conversation, but radical, honest, not just talk, but a conversation that is transformative, that will have economic implications, that will have political implications, that will have social implications, because reparation must lead to a new society, a new humanity in St. Lucia and Caribbean society. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Papa. Thank you for elevating the discussion on reparations beyond the issue of just wanting our grandfathers back pay, for elevating it to the much broader developmental and moral issues that we need to consider, that must be addressed, and for also taking into consideration the structural transformation that is necessary if reparatory justice is ever to be attained. Thank you also for the very interesting and very interactive mode of delivery this evening that kept us engaged throughout your conversation. You have set the bar very high for those lecturers who are to follow. Thank you. And now we move on to a presentation, once again, from Mr. Earl Buskey. As you would have gathered by now, tonight is just the first of a series of 12 lectures which aim to ventilate as many sides of the reparation struggle as possible. This 12-month-long lecture series is in no small part the result of the vision of the chair of our National Reparations Committee, Mr. Earl Buskey, who has worked tirelessly with the help of the committee members on refining the best possible list of lectures, the best possible list of lecturers, okay, to bring out the overall theme of reparatory justice. Every effort has been made to ensure that a broad cross-section of topics are covered, and also an effort has been made to synchronize the lectures with the rhythms of the month, of the particular month that they are being delivered in. The results of such careful thought and planning is an enviable calendar of lectures that I now invite Mr. Buskey to present to us. Mr. Buskey?
Thanks again, Leslie. It's my task, indeed, my challenge to bring you the next 12 months in the next 10 minutes. So without much time left, let me say it's a pleasure for all of us in the National Reparations Council to have started with you this evening a lecture series that will continue every month for the next year. These lectures will include topics highlighting the role of Sir Arthur Lewis as the intellectual author of the first Caribbean blueprint for reparations, launching of What's Left of the UN Decade for People of African Descent, participation in the 2020 Creole Heritage Month Festival in St. Lucia, observance of the usual annual November Memorial Day and December 13 holiday, but in different ways, a reparations lecture during the 2021 Nobel Laureates Festival, and making St. Lucia's case for reparations from Britain and France for slavery and native genocide. Of course, we are starting off this evening's activity at a time when regional and world events since the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the NRC were established in 2013 have seen seismic shifts in the equilibrium of the reparations debate globally. The reparations movement in the USA has adopted the CARICOM approach for the first time, that a large group of governments, 15 in all, have made one mind to make one case for reparations. Today, in the news, Namibia, Burundi, and Congo have joined the calls for reparations from European nations. The Black Lives Matter movement and the subsequent protests and the killing of George Floyd and so many others before him, including St. Lucia's Botham Jean, resulted in the global response that shook Britain and the United States to the core, as people rose to say, enough is enough. More people everywhere are more interested today in learning more about reparations, whether in the United States of America or Africa, even in Europe. In Europe, where Greece is also today seeking 300 billion euros worth of reparations from Germany. So reparations is nothing new. The Jews received reparations from Germany and built the Israel we know today after 1948. The Japanese Americans illegally detained as suspect spies during the World War II were also compensated with reparations. South Korean women have for long decades been demanding an apology and compensation and reparations from Japan for being made sex slaves during the war. Kenyans more recently received reparations from Britain for the massacre of Mau Mau freedom fighters by British soldiers during Kenya's independence struggle in the 1960s. Besides, the Maori people in New Zealand and the Aborigines in Australia, Africans who lived in those countries before sailing boats were invented, are still today fighting historical segregation and inequality in those countries. CARICOM is also seeking reparations for the native genocide against the first people met here by Columbus in 1492 and decimated by systematic slaughter to make way for slavery. The Caribs in Dominica, the Garifunas of St. Vincent and Belize, the first people of Trinidad and Tobago, the Amerindians of Guyana, the so-called Bush Negroes of Suriname, all have histories of exploitation and near extermination by the Europeans. But our first people are still made to feel like the last, treated as second class, even third class in some instances. Reparations, therefore, has a long Caribbean history that is only now starting to be told. Sir Arthur Lewis, as we've already heard, who called for reparations way back in 1939 in his first major book entitled Labor in the West Indies. But the British ignored it for the past 80 years, just as the US has for over 140 years failed to deliver on the promise of 40 acres and a mule that Paba just referred to the families of ex-slaves who fought for America's independence. The chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, Sir Hilary Beckles, who is also the vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies and has led a long fight for recognition of his predecessor's role as an earlier champion reparations advocate, is as pleased today as all Caribbean people that the CARICOM leaders have today agreed to adopt Sir Arthur's blueprint as the template for a proposed Caribbean development reparations plan to be financed by the European states that benefited from transatlantic slavery. The proposed Lewis Plan for European Atonement through Reparatory Justice, as proposed by the CRC, is to be financed by the European states that benefited from transatlantic slavery, like I said, and of course it is appropriately named the Lewis Plan. So tonight's inaugural lecture, like Monsignor Anthony said, is taking place just 3 days ahead of August 23rd, recognized every year by the United Nations as the International Day for Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. Why August 23rd? Again, the date is significant because during the night of August 22nd and 23rd in 1791, on the island of Haiti, right here in the Caribbean, an uprising began that sets forth events which were a major factor leading to the Haitian Revolution in January 1804, which set the stage for the eventual abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. But here too in our Caribbean, reparations has its own special history, written and etched in the eternal or in the eternity of our memory, but hardly read, hardly remembered by us. The earliest reparations in the Caribbean were demanded after the Haitian Revolution defeated the French army, which was led by Napoleon's brother, and established the world's first Black Republic and ended and outlawed slavery, making Haiti the first and only country in the world at the time that abolished slavery and made it illegal. But for that, the French decided that Haiti should pay and be made an example of. The French therefore defeated the revolution, and the French planters who lost their property, meaning stolen land and slaves, demanded over 150 million French francs in gold in 1825, an amount equal today to 21 billion US dollars, which Haiti did not finish paying until 1947, and from which payment it has never, ever recovered. But instead of observing August 23rd as the day set aside by the United Nations to remember the part played by a Caribbean country in bringing an eventual end to the transatlantic slave trade, we continue to observe August 1st as a colonially imposed holiday across the Commonwealth Caribbean, celebrating emancipation, which only removed the chains from the legs and necks of the slaves and tied them around their bellies and their pockets through the system of apprenticeship. All that said, as a normal Earl Bousquet brief, here is what I promise will be a shorter brief on the 12 lectures we will be presenting as of next month. So please take a note, and while at it, bear in mind that in this COVID-19 age in 2020, everything is subject to change. When change is the new normal, when nothing is normal anymore. So here is our schedule for the next 11 months. On September 24, and the secret is that these lectures will all take place on the third Thursday of every month. And on Thursday, September 24th, the lecture will be entitled History and Reparations as Important Subjects for the Caribbean School Curriculum. And that lecture will be delivered by Professor Vereen Shepherd, who is with us online as we speak. She's also the Vice Chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and Director of the Reparations Research Center, which helped organize the June 12th online conference for Youth and Students that we hosted here earlier. In October, the 22nd of October, we will have a very important lecture entitled Reparations pour tout le monde, meaning in English, reparations for everyone. And that you will understand is part of our Creole Heritage Month reparations activities. And that lecture in Creole will be delivered by the inimitable Dame Pearlette Louise. In November, 26th of November, we will be recalling West Indians at war and a legacy of imperial neglect. And that is an examination of how West Indians who fought for the empire in World War II were neglected thereafter by the crown up until today. And on December 13th, also a Thursday, but also a holiday in St. Lucia, we will be looking at the issue, First People, Last Citizens, from native genocide to national isolation. What next? And that will be an examination of how much we know and appreciate the sacrifices and contributions of national heroes and heroines, and that will be by Ambassador Dr. June Suma, Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States. We will start next year on January 21st, and one of this year's Nobel Laureates Festival Independence Lectures will be delivered as part of this series by St. Lucia-born Professor Algie Henry Lee, head of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies, SALISES, at the UWI Mona campus in Jamaica. Then in February, on February 18th, we will be sponsoring a lecture entitled CARICOM's Renaming Project. And that will be based on a presentation by Dr. Hilary Brown, the Manager of Cultural Affairs at the CARICOM Secretariat, we hope, and to be followed by a local panel on the implications of CARICOM's Renaming Project for St. Lucia. Our March lecture will be delivered on the 18th as scheduled, but is still under negotiation. However, a very big one will take place on the 15th of April, and that is a lecture on St. Lucia's case for reparations from Britain and France. And that lecture, or that evening's activity, will be led with a presentation on the CRC's approach to making the Caribbean's legal case for reparations from Britain and the European Union for slavery and native genocide. And that case will be outlined by Leroy Jomo Thomas, the Speaker of the Parliament in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, followed by a presentation by a prominent local lawyer and by a panel of local lawyers on the issue how to make St. Lucia's case. The Bar Association and individual lawyers interested in reparations will also be consulted and involved in this debate, which, like I have hinted twice before, will also include the fact that St. Lucia will have to make a case for reparations from 2 European states, from Britain as well as from France. On May 20th next year, we will be looking at our past heroes that Monsignor Anthony begged that we remember. And among the two we'll be looking at on the 20th of May next year will be John Quinlan and William Arthur Lewis. And we'll be looking at their roles in the quest for reparations. And that will be a presentation followed by a panel discussion on identification and popularization of our forgotten heroes. And in June, on June 17th, we will have a lecture on Sir Arthur Lewis's legacy in the 21st century, with presentations hopefully by the likes of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and Dame Pearlette Louise, to be followed by a panel on how best to celebrate Sir Arthur at home and in the Caribbean. And our final lecture next year will be on July 15th, From Apology to Action. Where next for the reparations movement after Black Lives Matter protests and the toppling of monuments to slavery and racism. And that will be, of course, a presentation by CRC officials, followed by a panel on perspectives for St. Lucia. So, all that said, I thank you for your attention. And of course, we're looking forward to you also joining us for our next series of lectures to be launched next month, when Professor Shepherd will be delivering her lecture. As I said earlier, the lecture in September will be on the history and reparations as important subjects for the Caribbean school curriculum. And that will be the inaugural lecture in a similar series to run parallel with this one launched tonight. But that series, which is started in several secondary schools, will continue. However, with more than 20 secondary schools and only 12 months in the year, we will most likely have to be looking at focusing on 2 secondary schools per month. But look forward to that, when we will be hoping as well to combine the deliveries by both local and regional international lecturers. So thanks for joining us this evening, and we look forward to you joining us in the future, in and for the future lectures in this series, and of course for the Double Barrel Schools series, which will also follow next month. Once again, thank you.
And thank you so much for bringing us up to date with all of the wonderful plans that we have starting this coming September and all the way into next year. It's a very exciting array. You can see a lot of thought has gone into it. A lot of thought has gone into exactly which month each of the lectures take place. And thank you so much for all of the effort that you have put into it. And so this evening, all that remains really is for me to say thank you to the many persons who have helped make this evening's event a success. I start, of course, with thanking Paba for his wonderful presentation. I think I gave a fulsome thank you a little earlier, so I'll just say thank you very much once again. Thank you to all of our launch partners, Dame Paulette Louisi, Mr. Earl Busquet, Dr. Keith Nurse, Mr. Embert Charles. Thank all of you for participating this evening. And of course, sometimes we forget that and we only see those who are in front of the camera, those who are making the various presentations, but behind the scenes, there's always a wonderful team supporting us and ensuring that everything goes well. Thank you so much to our technical team spread throughout the region. Mr. David Foster, Mr. Patrick Johnson, Mr. Richard Barth, Janet Carew and Maxie as well. All of them who have come on board from our marketing division and from UETV to provide us with the advice and the support that we needed to ensure that tonight's presentation went smoothly. Thank you to Mr. CJ Bonady, who patiently put together the flyer. And of course, in his line of work, there's always a lot of back and forth, making things sure that everything is just right. We thank CJ for his patience with us and for getting our flyer out for us promptly. We thank others like Ms. Sigathani Joseph and Naomi Remy Laurent, Marcia Reed. We thank Miguel Felix and Jeremiah Joseph, our videographer tonight as well. And while you wouldn't realize that behind the scenes again, we were also doing double duty. We had the Zoom events going on, but simultaneously we are filming for UETV to ensure that many more persons than just those persons who have joined us in the various rooms tonight will be able to enjoy these lectures. So as far as possible, while we present via Zoom, we are also recording so that we can then hand over the recordings to UWE-TV, who will work their magic and present it repeatedly so that a much wider audience can also enjoy these lectures. So thank you everyone for everything you have done. It really does take a village. And I am so thankful for all of the support that we have received. And of course, I thank you, our audience, for joining us tonight. Everything that we have put together is for your enjoyment, for your edification. And please spread the word. There is, in general, a rhythm to these lectures. So just remember the third Thursday of every month. Please join us and enjoy the wonderful lineup of lectures that we have planned for you. Thank you, everyone, and good night.